Okay, so good afternoon again, and thank you for joining. So this is last breakout sessions today. So let's discuss our as much as possible, and we'll discuss about global supply chain and risk and resilience. Actually, some problem happen always. Supply chain problems come up, right? Because in the past years, we had built up the optimal and the efficient supply chain across the global scales. And supply chain was highly integrated, and we are happy, right? But due to the situations and the integrations of the supply chain, every time we have some problems, always supply chain problem come up. And because of deeper integrations, if something happens somewhere in the world, whole supply chain will face the serious problems. And actually, many single problems will connected to the supply chain. So, for example, emissions, consumer behaviors, or technology changes, COVID-19, of course, Corona, and also heavily affected by geopolitics these days. So for business leaders, it's not easy to understand the situations, what happened for our supply chains, because the many different factors are connected with supply chain. So let's find what would be the critical issue in terms of supply chains for business leaders and how we will tackle with them. So firstly, we like to ask the distinguished panelists, what would be the critical issue for them? Maybe different perspective from different positions, different region. That's one question to them. And more importantly, how we can be resilient against supply chain issues, right? So again, this is very important issues. And today we had actually two German from Germany and two from Japanese, but unfortunately one Germany is missing because of his health condition, unfortunately. So Sandra-san, please take two roles from Germany and two from Japan, right? So sorry, we are three Japanese people in the floor, but we try to be global. All right. So and one more thing, today we have a lot of discussions, and Japan and Germany are defined as middle power countries against U.S., China, could be Russia, but anyways, against U.S. and China, middle power group would be maybe questions. And if we can see how typical two countries like Japan and Germany will create a situation, it will be a very insightful learning. Okay, so first of all, let me ask the same question to all panelists. In these complications, what would be the critical issue for you in terms of supply chain and why? So may I ask Sandra-san from German policymaker point of view, what would be, maybe you have a lot of issues in Germany, what would be the most critical issue for you and why? Could you share with us? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you so much for picking such an important topic for the discussion today. I think everyone that is interested in geopolitical politics is right now very alert on what is going on. You asked me what is the main the most critical issue maybe for a supply chain, and I really would say the resilience to make supply chains more more able to cope with difficulties. And I totally agree with you what you said in the beginning. We looked a lot of efficiency in the past. We really had huge steps when it came to just-in-time production. And we basically believed that the global markets would provide us with all the goods that we need in every second of the production processes. And when at least, I think when it comes to Germany and Japan, we discovered that this is not true. And so maybe the most important issue is to find a good combination between efficiency and resilience. That would be the first remark.
Okay, thank you very much. Why you pick up that point? Because you are facing a lot of problems as German country, but you pick up that point. What would be the reason? That's your first important point?
Well, you're perfectly right. We discover right now in Germany, but maybe also in Europe as a whole, that we relied too much on you say unstable partners, I would call them. As you might know, for example, Germany relied to 50% for its primary energy supply on Russia. So for our economy, cheap Russian gas was very important in the past. And because of the cruel war of Russia in the Ukraine and the sanctions that the Western countries put on Russia, they stopped basically importing gas. And now we have the situation that the Russian imports of gas are at zero right now. And that, of course, does something to energy prices, as you know. So what is pretty clear from a German perspective right now, that we never want to be that dependent on an unstable country in important goods in the future. We want to be more resilient when it comes to our energy supply, and we want to focus on our partners, especially also Japan, to have like a secure secure economic relations that it could really bring us in the future.
I see. Thank you very much. So this is situation. So we need to look at the really important partners to clear the situations. That's your point, if I understand well. Okay. So thank you very much. So the next one, Daisuke Murata-san, he's CEO of the Japanese manufacturing companies and diversify the various industries and various regions. So what is your critical issue in terms of the global supply chain? Could you say your...
I'm running a private company, so let me talk about the, besides the global macroeconomic impact of the supply chain confusion. As a private company, as a manufacturing company in Japan, the major issue is customization. And even today, it's very difficult to get some special parts. So many companies, not only our companies, but also the other Japanese manufacturing companies, rushed into changing their design, mainly for circuit board and electronic components and those electronic parts, to the standardization, to make more common parts, and to make it more resilient against the supply chain confusion. But that will result in the losing Japanese companies' competitive edge of customization. We have been doing very good at our competitors to differentiate ourselves with a very fine customization. But now we are going to standard modularization. We should do that. But on the other hand, we may lose some edge in front of the customers. That is in long run affect our business. And also the supply chains very optimal. And as Sandra-san said, both German and Japanese companies get advantage out of that to the supply of products to the developing countries, including China, India, those all over the world, utilizing also optimal supply chain. But it's now that disrupted a lot. We have to prepare for that, and that is another challenge.
So thank you very much. Maybe our strengths, what Japanese companies, or could be German companies' strengths in the past, now are becoming the very big hurdle to clear the situations. Is that the point which you like to share? Okay. So, Shibata-san, you are the researcher for macro issues, and what would be the essential points in terms of global supply chain after having the points from Sandra-san and Murata-san? Any observations or points which you like to share with us?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Takahashi-san and Murata-san and Sandra-san for having me here today.
It's an honor for me to be on this panel. Let me just start off by saying that I'm delighted that there's so many people interested in supply chains because supply chains used to be something that we only talked about when something went wrong. It was never really a strategy discussion until very recently. So I'm happy that there are so many people interested in supply chains. I think when we say supply chain disruption or supply chain crisis, we're often talking about a couple of different things. And if you Google supply chain disruption today, you'll probably find images of ships backlogged in the port of Los Angeles or Long Beach or something like that. And so I think it's important to unpack what we mean when we say supply chain disruption or supply chain issues. So when you say supply chain disruptions, I think we're really talking about three different things. Number one is logistics issues, logistics shocks, right? Number two would be supply and demand issues. So those are market forces of supply and demand, right? And then number three is geopolitics, right? So logistics issues, I think, you may remember right around this time last year, there was big news around, ports backlogs, ships being backlogged up the port of Los Angeles, Long Beach in the US, right? That was a logistics capacity issue, right? So there were not enough ships or not enough trucks, not enough people to drive those trucks, right? So there was just not enough capacity in the logistics network and the distribution network to carry goods. Okay, so that's a supply chain disruption, but that's a logistics shock, right? And then the second point, the second type of shock would be supply and demand shocks, right? Or supply side shocks, you may call it, right? So these are market forces where you have, large discrepancies or huge, ups and downs in the supply or demand, I should say, right? And suppliers or manufacturers end up not being able to cope with that surge or that fall, right? So that's a market issue. That's a supply and demand issue. And then the third type is, as we've been discussing all day today, really, is geopolitical shocks that involve, issues around economic security, right? Now, I think the companies during globalization have spent 10 years, 20 years globalizing their supply chains to the extent that, the supply chain, even though the word supply chain gives the impression that it's some kind of a sequence or a linear thing, it's actually more like a spider web, right? The supply chain today is more like a supply web. And there are choke points all over that web that, if just one small issue and one single choke point can cause disruptions along the entire supply chain or supply web, as you might call it, right? And I think the important point is that those choke points are different by industry or different by a product, or at least the most important choke points are different by product or industry. So if you take like a mass consumables product, right, the choke points are probably more in the logistics because as we saw with, toys or, household goods being, shipped from China to the US, but, they weren't arriving on time because of logistics issues, right? So mass consumables, I think the biggest issue is usually in logistics, right? If you talk about strategic goods, right, so like semiconductors, right, I think the biggest shock is more on the supply side, right? Supply side. So, there's just too much demand, right? And, the suppliers or manufacturers aren't able to keep up with and meet that demand, right? And then there's geopolitics, right? So semiconductors is also a geopolitical issue where countries are, where countries are intentionally, preventing certain goods from being traded, and therefore it exacerbates the discrepancies in supply and demand, right? So I think, again, these are three different types of shocks. The choke points are different depending on what industry you're talking about. But I'd like to come back to, geopolitics, right? So why are we talking so much about geopolitics today, and why is geopolitics such an important part of the supply chain? And I think my answer to that is because geopolitics cannot be managed, right? You talk about supply chain management, you talk about logistics management, right? These are things that can be managed to a certain extent by private companies, right, through company efforts, but geopolitics cannot be managed. There's no such thing as geopolitics management, right? I think we've never heard of it. I've never heard of it, and I don't think it exists, right? So I think the point, the fact that geopolitics is such an integral part of the supply chain, but with the supply chain discussion, but it's something that no single company can manage. And that is precisely why supply chains have become such a strategy discussion or strategy agenda. And I think, going back to your question of what is the most important issue, if you look at geopolitics as a whole, it's something that you can't manage, which means that you need to develop certain scenarios for how you are going to cope in case something happens, right? You need to have different scenarios. You need to have different plans. So, long story short, I think, geopolitics, how do you prepare for different scenarios that may evolve in geopolitics is my biggest concern, or my biggest concern when it comes to supply chains. Okay, so thank you very much for framing 3 points: logistics, the mismatching, supply issues, and geopolitics. Right. So first two things are different from the third one, but could you make it clarify that which one is most important and which one you should take for this discussion? Do I understand your question? So there are 3 points. So for discussion today, which cause is most important discussion issue today? So I think for discussion today, I'd like to focus on geopolitics. I see. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So thank you for sharing your critical points, and let's go into the most important discussions. How we can be resilient. Some out of our control, some maybe within our control. But how we can be resilient. And then Murata-san, as a CEO of the company, what are you doing? And Murata is engaged with the various countries, including China. So what are you doing today?
Yes.
Resilient.
From the beginning of today, I've been feeling that the global G1 spirit to be active, to act something, or instead of the criticizing, find action is very difficult in front of the issue like a supply chain. We can do little against the superfast conflict between US China. We can do nothing from the individually, COVID and the war. So it's very difficult to come up with some action. But as a president of a company, and what I have been doing is, firstly, as I said, to change the design, to adapt ourselves for the changing world, a kind of standardization. The second point is that we may lose the advantage of the customization of products, but as a hardware. But we may still have some software relationship through supply chain. Let me tell you one example. When we make some delivery delay, people and myself sometimes meet the customer to explain what's happening, and also at the same time go to the supplier to ask for the delivery improvement. It will not change the situation because irrationally, even if we apologize or ask, the situation don't change. But we do that. And if we visit customer both in face or in person or by the web, and we can find the situation at the customer site and why the customers need a machine as soon as possible. And the same thing for the upper stream of the supply chain to the supplier vendors. That kind of a tie and a link between throughout the supply chain must have been the Japanese company's one of the strengths. So shifting a competitive edge from the hardware product to the software, the relationship with the customer and supplier can be a key for Japanese manufacturer to survive in this very uncertain world. So I'm visiting customer, trying to spend more time to visit customers and suppliers, to observe and to explain. That is very important. What I do now.
Thank you very much. So what would you create the situations for visiting more frequently? The customers could be suppliers or partners. What situation would you create under these situations by doing this?
Again, the G1 spirit as a leader. And if the president is hard to hesitate to do that, the sales team don't do that. So actually, I'm been meeting our semiconductor customers almost 2-3 times a week over web. Okay. Sometimes under their request.
All right.
That kind of a discussion by the top is very important.
I see.
Otherwise, our procurement team and sales teams almost exhausted under this situation, which has been lasting for almost 2 years.
I see.
It's too much.
Mm-hmm. So, as a top management, him or herself should go to the customer's place or the the partner's place, and you yourself feel the situations and feel or sense the situations
That's
and reflect on your management operations
important.
in time.
For the company like us as privately owned family business.
I see. All right. Thank you very much. So, Soichiro-san, you are maybe having the different consultant clients, and you see the different situations in different industry or regions. Is there any the how to say the examples for us to share the resilience or the best practices or failures, whatever?
Right. So let me just first say that Japan is the birthplace of just-in-time production, right? So you all know that Japan just-in-time production was invented in Japan, if you will. And now the discussion is more about just-in-case production, right? So just-in-time production is about seeking efficiency, right? Efficiency, economic efficiency, and efficiency in the operations. And then just-in-case production is about balancing efficiency with resiliency, right? So the key question is, how do you build resiliency? The key question when it comes to how you build resiliency, I think is, how are you going to build redundancies into your supply chain, right? So the discussion, when I say redundancy, is similar to developing IT systems. I don't know if any of you have experience developing IT systems, but when you develop an IT system or IT solution, you usually develop redundancies because in Japanese, jochose, right? Because if something goes wrong and if the system fails, then you need to have backup, right? And I think, the thought process is similar in supply chains, where, you need to have perhaps, inventory buffers. Maybe you need to have multi-sourcing different, suppliers for the same type of parts, right? Maybe you need to diversify your production locations. Maybe you need to have or secure alternative trading routes alternative distribution routes, logistics routes, right? So these are different ways in which you can build in redundancies into your supply chain, right? I think, in my perspective, when you talk about, best practices, my impression is that Japanese companies, especially Japanese car companies, have, fared, comparatively speaking, relatively well, amidst the difficulties that we're facing. You may disagree with me, and I'm not trying to pretend that, we're immune from the global problems, but I think we've done relatively well when it comes to resiliency. And my theory is that this is because Japanese company supply chains are fairly well contained within each region, right? So when a Japanese car company, for example, wants to establish a new plant overseas, usually what they will do is the OEM will set up a new plant, right? And then they will bring all the not all, but many of the suppliers over with them, right? They will establish industrial parks, usually, funded by a Japanese conglomerate, right? And then they will essentially replicate this just-in-time production system in different locations of the world. Not every location, but in, key markets around the world, right? And so the result is that, at least for, some, major Japanese companies, I think you have high localization, local content ratio in the key markets like the US or Southeast Asia, right? To the extent that globally, as a global system, right, you end up having multiple suppliers. You end up having not logistics or distribution routes that are not so complex. Of course, they're already very complex, but they don't go back and forth between the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, right? As much. So some, yes, but not as much. Right? So I think I don't know if you call this a best practice or not, but just comparatively speaking, I think this regionalization approach that Japanese manufacturing, especially automotive companies, have taken in their global production has ended up being a more resilient model. Again, I'm not saying that we're immune from the global issues, but I think comparatively speaking, that does seem to be the case right now.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm a bit surprised that the Japanese according to your explanation, Japanese company do well, right? Go.
You do okay, relatively okay.
It happened by chance, or it happened by their strategies. Or first of all, German manufacturers really nice, or the global integrations, and maybe are the IoT 4.0 or something like this. So our integrations went well. Then on the other hand, Japanese companies are a little bit delayed on this, but by chance it happened to make some good situations, right? So regional optimizations helped the situation for Japanese company. Is that right or not?
Yes. So I think this is strategic. This is strategic, and I think it's a difference in strategy between some European countries and Japanese companies, Japanese and Japan, and not that one is good or the other, but they're just differences in strategy. So I think in the case of European countries, the strategy has been to use preferential trade agreements to increase the market for European produced goods, right? Whereas, of course, Japan does that as well. But, when Japanese companies invest overseas, it's more about, investing long-term in the region, right? And, making contribution to the local economy and, being, somewhat shielded from foreign exchange risks and supply chain risks, right? So I think, having been involved in some strategy discussions myself, this is not something that happened by chance, but it was a strategy decision. Of course, maybe no one anticipated the situation that we're in right now, but I think this is strategic.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Sandra-san, thank you for waiting. You are also the policymaker from Germany. So we're hearing from the voices of business people here, but nevertheless, what would you in your mind to support the industries? And as a government policymaker, what you're in your mind? And you look quite pragmatic among Green Party members. So what was in your mind to support the industries or make it resilient? Could you share your thoughts on this?
Let me just make one small remark to what Murata-san said, because I couldn't agree more. I think indeed it's not like that Japan does not have some homeworks to do, but I think really you did a great job in being strategic and being more resilient than especially Germany. I have to admit that because you put, I would, as I understood it, from what you said, Murata-san, you put more emphasis on long-term relationships. This is what, for example, our automotives do not do so well. They are very harsh with their supply chain members, the small companies that deliver the different parts that you need to build a vehicle. So I think really this is a different strategic approach, and I would really say that you have an advantage right now in this harsh geopolitical waters that we face.
I'm glad to hear that.
What we can do in Germany and Europe, let me put it this way, maybe to learn a little bit more what the Japanese did, and maybe we can learn. And I'm very serious about that. We can learn how to have a proper risk management again. We said that efficiency was put first, and now we have to figure out how this goes together with really, proper risk management. It takes into account that certain goods might not be available in the world market at every time. And I like the expression of it is not just in time right now. It is more just a craze production. And I really think that this is a good point. And what do we do from a political side, or at least what are the plans for Germany right now, and maybe a little bit also for the European Union? Well, the first thing, of course, is to secure our energy supply at the moment. This is the most important issue that we face right now. And this is also a topic of resilience. And the German and also the European way, in a way, is to foster renewables, because we say that wind and sun do not follow a dictator. They are not owned by anyone. So we want to have 80% of renewables in Germany to 2030, and we hope to be able to do the rest of our energy supply with gas comes from LNG, and to have a huge storage system so that we might be independent from Russian gas within the next years. The prices are not a problem, but we do not talk about gas prices today here, so I leave that out. So that is basically the main thing that we are concerned right now. This is energy supply. When it comes to medium-term political action, we try to reduce complexity in the supply chain. To over the overall supply chain. When I talk to some of my business leaders here in private, they sometimes say that they do not even know their supply chain so well because it's all too complex. As you said, we ship from ocean to ocean and back again. So what I think also many companies do right now is to figure out what they can do to kind of reshore a pre-production of things, to kind of make long-term contracts with certain suppliers. And what we talk a lot also is to have regional circular economy circles. This is especially important when it comes to resource efficiency and to our way towards a climate neutral economy. You know that Europe wants to be climate neutral until 2050. And we see from a political side, we see the circular economy also as a chance to reduce our emissions. And that might, on the other side, contribute to more resilient supply chain because you have smaller regional contexts in which you're dealing in. What we and that is the third thing I would mention. What we do from the political side to make supply chain more resilient is to focus more on our, let's say, value partners, for especially Japan and the US, because we do believe in a free trade system. It hurt me a little bit when I think it was Murata-san that said you cannot manage geopolitics. Well, at least we tried to do it a little bit when it comes to United Nations, to the World Trade Organization. We try to find some rules that would make it easier to work together in a globalized world. But I have to admit, you're true. We're not obviously not too good in it. But the value partners and the cooperation between democracies is, I think, a major step to also make global trade system more stable, more resilient. But I mean, it's China and all the stuff that comes with it much more better than we do in Europe. But we also know, of course, that it is not a solution to kind of redo globalization. This is not the issue we should talk about, but we should work together among the partners, the democracies, and be very careful what we share with the others, because we have to assume that they might use our weaknesses as a geopolitical point.
Okay, Sanderson, thank you so much. Maybe we talk about the collisions, so how we react to the country like the other side of the policies. But before that, let me ask you quickly about energy policies for German. Maybe German is mostly suffering from energy issues in this situation, and maybe you imported the energy from Russia, maybe 30-50% of the total LNG, and then it was totally stopped. And German is the mostly taking ideal energy policy in the past, or still now, right? So renewable energies, maybe the German try to be the leader of this. But under these situations and the energy prices are 3 times, 5 times, and some rumor this winter, it becomes like 10 times of prices compared to the last year. So may I ask you, this is a little bit sensitive issue that the German are anti-nuclear power policy. Are there any discussions? Will you modify, or will you come back to the taking the nuclear power plant are under these situations? What is the situation in Germany? In Japan, gradually we start to come back for the nuclear plants, nuclear power plant. What is happening in Germany?
We do talk about the pros and cons of nuclear power in Germany right now. And there are certain parties that want to have nuclear power plants again in the energy mix. But from the governmental point of view, we stick to end nuclear power plants in Germany at the latest point in April 2023. So next year in April, we shut them down. And we have 3 reasons for that. We are pretty sure right now nuclear power plants contribute to about 2 or 3% to German energy supply.
So we do increase or
and this is
what is the trend? What is the direction? We do
and it is further it's further reduced. We do have we will have 2 power plants running longer than expected. They should have stopped the production in December, and we will have 2 of them till April. But we will do not prolong them furthermore, because we can and all like there is a little bit of a political discussion from a technical point of view. You can substitute the energy that they deliver with renewables. The basic question that we have right now: how do we get so fast that every roof gets a photovoltaic and every village gets its windmills? That is basically the discussion right now. But you're perfectly true. We do talk about these issues. And well, especially from a green point of view, I think the 2 aspects are really important. That is security. When you look at the Ukrainian war right now, we are very concerned about the nuclear power plant of Zaporizhzhia. That is within the war zone, and the Russian troops took over this place, and we are very very concerned that we will have another Chernobyl over there. And
okay, so basically you can change the policy against the nuclear power even now. That's a basic understanding from Germany. Okay, thank you very much. So today we have a lot of discussions, and the supply chain is one of the issues in different the theme of the panel. And most of the people saying we need to reconstruct the supply chain with the friendly countries like the Quad or the same policy of the countries. And Kono-san, one of the ministers, also saying that he needs to understanding to reconstruct the supply chain with the friendly countries. So Munata-san, I have a question. The CEO of the company, if these situations are continuous, what is your strategy? What would you do to reconstruct of the supply chain after having the various locations all over the world? What will you do?
I think that one of the theme of today's conference, Roaring Twenties 2.0. So let's compare 1920 and today in terms of the cotton spinning, textile, our foundation. 100 years ago, we needed tens of times machines and space and workers and energy to produce the same amount of cotton product, almost 20 times, 30 times. So technology advancement for efficiency and productivity has been changing, and that will be a major driving force in future too. That is one point difference between the today and the 1920. Second difference, in 1920, textile products were produced all over the world. In England, Europe, America, Japan, and in China and India by foreign capital. So everywhere. Now it's too much concentration, mainly in China. And that direction may change into the, of course, efficiency and the productivity technology go along with the society's needs. No? But the supply chain issue is highly political, may change. So we have to adjust ourselves to the diverse and the disrupted supply chain. As you said, we create some new block. But I don't think it is not the goal. I think that eventually we should dream the globalization again. As Sandra-san said, we do globalization. In short run, we have to survive. We have to adapt ourselves to the new supply chain. But it's not really a right track. We have to somehow go back into the real global supply chain again. Maybe it may take decades. I'm not a politician, so as I said, I can do little. But I can dream. So far as the business sector, don't abandon the dream. Politicians can help doing that. So I think that adjusting ourselves to the new change, but we should not abandon the dream of the globalization. We really enjoyed in the past 20 years.
So, will you keep your supply chain even in China or some other countries which are now against Japanese?
And also enable the technology. So far as we have come up with a new technology, that will eventually help us reconstruct the next generation's supply chain globally.
I see. So you will try to,
after resolving all those issues in politics. And
I see. So, Sanders, and this quick questions. German industries are heavily involved in Chinese market, and maybe sometimes stronger than Japanese companies in terms of the automobile industries. How would you do this, or as a policymakers, the German companies' involvement in China? What would you do for this if we try to reconstruct the supply chains in terms of the the friendly countries network? What will you do that for this? What's your idea for this?
Well, let me be true. It is a very hard time for my country because it is at the end of being naive. We, although a lot of partners said, be careful about Russia, we continued to be naive. And what is now like clear to everyone is that this should not happen again, that we are so dependent on one region when it comes to the core of our industrial heart. So that is the experience.
Like to step back from Chinese market.
So that is, and now I come to your question. Making this decision, this experience right now, changes the German debate about sovereignty, about resilience. But we are still at the very beginning of having this discussion when it comes to China. So my impression is that we are having like a hard time to with the situation right now. So there is not a huge time to have a more long-term strategic debates. But I would say that there are kind of three groups that I can see right now in the discussion. The ones are let's learn from the Russian experience and be more careful.
Yeah.
To have really put all your emphasis on China. The second are maybe things will be normal again, and we will continue. We can continue, they don't have to change anything. That is maybe the second position, and the third is China is not Russia. They are more you can more rely on them because they're more interested in economic connections, and they will be more rational, not that imperialistic. I would say these are the three school of thoughts, when you might call it that way.
Yeah, thank you very much for trying to answer to a very sensitive questions. But you learned a lot from Russians' experiences, but maybe you think that the Chinese are a little bit different from Russians. So let's see what we're going on. Okay, so it's time to open up a Q&A. Any questions from the floor? Let me take 2 or 3 questions. So one here, and second and third. And then if you like to nominate some panelists, please make some name. Please let us know.
Thank you very much for the wonderful discussion. My name is Nobuhiro Hami, and from Monitor Deloitte, Japan. So my question is regarding the how to develop the constructive and framework for better futures. So today's keyword is regional and long-term commitment and value sharing that we have discussed. But from private sector, as Murata-san mentioned, the private sector's point of view and public or government sector's point of view is a little bit different.
Okay.
So I'd like to learn from the German perspective. Now we have international speakers in Japan and public and private sectors. So my question is, how to what is the request from, especially from the government side, and even in the German case is okay, to private sectors.
Okay.
So from the private sectors, what is the request to government sector to have a constructive, regional, economic and framework?
Thank you for a very nice, great questions. Right. And second one, please. Cho-san.
Yeah. Thank you for today. Today's discussion is mainly focused on the hardware, I believe. And do you see any risk to in global supply chain in terms of software?
Okay. So maybe in terms of the knowledge management, IP, whatever. Thank you very much. And third one, yes.
Hi, Aziz Ben Sultana, full-time MBA, CEO of Global Citizens Translation. Cheap oil is good. Cheap labor is good. Profit is amazing until Russia invades Ukraine. I think there is some similarities between Germany and Japan. Germany being next to a massive country. Japan, same. For the Japanese representatives, I would like to ask you if you see any similarities the same way I see, and if you have any plan for potential crisis. And also I have another question for Dr. Detzer. Do you see any further risks in Europe happening? And do you have any more plans now that we all learned a lesson?
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much. So first questions, constructive framework for long term. So what would be the request from private to government? What would be the request from government to private? So may I ask Murata-san, she's not your government, but it's nice to share with your governance.
We are going to follow each country's government. We will follow rules. In other session, they're talking about a weaponized economy. It's okay for the government to grant my fees to use as a weapon and swinging around, it's okay. But we'll follow it. But on the other hand, there's no border in business. So we seek and ask everybody to reconstruct the unified world again. That's the best for everybody, not only us, but all the business sectors people that wish.
Okay, so
We follow the rule.
so politicians should try to unify again. That's your basic request to the government or people. Am I right? Okay, Sandra-san, it's chance. It's not your people, but there's Japanese business people. So what would be the request from government to private sectors in terms of long-term constructing the situations? Any request?
Well, maybe 2 points. The first is to really contribute to a proper risk management, also within a company, just to make sure that you know your supply chains and you know your partners, that you make sure that you have a really a resilient or as resilient as possible business case. That would be great. So that it is not only about profits and only about the fast cash. And I know that especially family enterprises, that we have a lot of in Germany as well, that absolutely agree on this issue. I talked to one a couple of days ago. He said, what we are shipping around the world, only when it comes to my business, is crazy. It's not normal. We can do this like in a different way. And I think this would be one criteria, one request, so to say. If I had a wish, I would say that. And the second is a more aspect for society as a whole. We will have to cope with a lot of risks right now and challenges. So talk to your employers, talk to your people, and make sure that we have the social cohesion that we need for this transformation. My experience is that it's so important how business leaders do explain situations to their employees, how they explain politics, whether they just say, well, these are all idiots, I can't understand that, they should go away, or whether they say, well, they have a hard job, and they try to cope with the situation, or something, you know what I mean, some kind of mediation role, I would say. That would be one wish when I can have that, because I think it is really important that we stick together in this hard situation.
Very nice points. Thank you so much. So communications between government and leaders and members, that is very the request from the Sandras. Okay, so maybe this answer covers the third question. So let's take the second question about the software. Shibata-san, could you answer to his question in short?
So I think the question was, do you see any risks or issues in the software supply chain, right? So I think, we're entering an age where it's not going to be possible to completely separate hard and soft supply chains, right? Because manufacturing is being automated. The supply chains are being automated, digitized, right? And so there's going to be data all over the place. And so I think the hard supply chain, the soft supply chain, you can't completely separate these two. And when it comes to soft supply chains or digital supply chains, maybe it's a better word. I think it's all about data management and cybersecurity, right, and data analytics. And because you can't separate these two, I think currently China is probably leading on the data, and then in terms of analytics and computing, maybe the U.S. is leading. I don't know if leading is the appropriate word, but they are investing a lot in it. I think ultimately because you can't separate hard and soft, you're going to end up with a similar phenomena where you're going to have U.S.-centric or Western-centric digital supply chains versus China-centric supply chains. Maybe there will be some integration here and there, but I think that's the direction that we're heading in.
Okay, and thank you very much. So may I get some questions from online?
So we have 2 questions online. I'll read it first. Let me know if we can have both. So the first one is, how far off are we from having truly advanced manufacturing technology, for example, 4D printing, which enables a more complete decentralization of industrial manufacturing? And is this being considered in terms of increasing the future resilience of supply chains?
Okay.
Second question?
Yeah.
All right. Second question is very short and simple. Can AI be combined with SCM? It can. How?
I see. The questions are a little bit similar each other, right? So anybody try to answer to these questions. New technology will help the resilience of supply chain. Murata-san, would you try?
I'm a tech optimist and by train. And yes, technology can solve some problem, but I think concentration and the deconcentration, same technology can be used for both. We can adapt for both worlds. So as I said, as a driving engine, the new technology, well, less footprint, more efficiency, productivity, that will help a lot. And maybe combined with AI. So I'm a believer of technology as a profession. So the answer is yes.
Definitely. Shibata-san, would you like to add some?
I think I agree with Murata-san. I think AI is already being integrated into or being used in the supply chains and predicting where there might be risks or issues, right? And I think I think one thing maybe that wasn't in the question is there's also a concept of like digital twins using AR and VR and to produce digital images or digital replicates of all the physical products that are in the manufacturing and supply chain process. So I think this has already happened, and so I think those two things will come together.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 3 minutes more. So maybe related to the question from the third one, we have a lot of discussion from this morning, and some people saying Japan and not necessarily Germany, but these countries are middle power in the global marketplace. And according to the discussions, the roles of these countries are significantly important from now on. Those are the comments from the panelists in the morning session or previous sessions. So for this point of view, are there any comments or your commitment to play a role in the global marketplace? So I would like to, this would be the last comments from each panelist. So starting from Murata-san, Shibata-san, and Sandra-san, in terms of this point, could you give us some message with your commitment? And I would like to close this session. So Murata-san, please.
Okay, I cannot solve every question at the same time, but at least I can believe and dream. And in long run, in long-term relationship, and believing that the world can be unified again.
I think maybe similar to Murata-san's comment, but short and simple. Supply chains are built on trust, right? You can have all the data you want, you can do all the analysis you want, but at the end of the day, if you cannot trust your partners, if your partners are going to do something that's erratic, then the supply chain will not function. So I think supply chains are based on trust, and whether that trust is coming from a so-called friendly country or countries that share similar values or not, I think how to build or building trust to make supply chains more resilient is I think my takeaway from this discussion.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Sandra, as a leader of the middle power, could you give us your message or commitment for the future?
We see at the moment how much trouble imperialistic and nationalistic like approaches bring us. And I'm very sure that the liberal democracy is stronger and that we will be, when we stick together, we will be able to have an innovative, climate neutral, and a planet worth living on it for our children and grandchildren. But we have to stick together and really not end up till the last 1920s. Let me say that. That is a huge difference. I hope we will see from the 20s of the last century to the 20s now. and that democracy is stronger, and democracy means then also stable supply chains, because we can trust in each other. That would be the wish that I have for the future, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will follow us on this way. So let's tear the ties stronger together.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for joining from the very early morning or Monday morning from Germany. So thank you very much. It's very difficult questions, but thank you for trying to answer honestly. And of course, the geopolitical trend could be against us, but the three of them are trying to find a way to keep the longer relationships. And there may be some hurdles, but if we keep such mindset, we can find some hint or possibilities that would be maybe I will watch for coming years. So thank you very much, and give hands to a panelist. Thank you so much.